I wanted to create a safe space to have uncomfortable yet transformative conversations that move people, amplifying the voices of those who are underrepresented and who inspire positive change. I'm Toni Williams, and this is Brooklyn Savvy.
Voting is a hot topic, but exercising it spells trouble in communities of color.
That's one of the reasons why I'm so glad we're having this conversation. We've seen some things over the past few years that make a lot of folks in our community question whether or not their vote actually has any real power and whether or not the government is actually paying attention. Does civics matter? And that tends to be where a lot of the conversation is headed at a time like this.
Today we're joined by Kathleen Daniel, an actionist, activist, and chief democracy officer for New York City, who will echo why it's important to keep showing up at the polls. Nonetheless, welcome, Kathleen, welcome.
Thank you, Toni. So happy to have this conversation with you all at the right time.
Exactly. Now, why is it that 23% of New Yorkers vote? I mean, that seems abysmal. What is that? What is driving that?
It is abysmal. And in fact, in the November general election in 23, we had less than 23%. We had about 21% show up
21
at the polls. 21%.
Ah,
so in
great.
New York City, over 90% of the people who are eligible to register are registered. We're just not showing up. And so our mission at Democracy NYC is to stop the drop between voter registration and activation. And here's what happens. There are many reasons and some excuses why people don't vote, particularly in the African American community. One of them is because we've been disenfranchised, and we cannot expect people who have been disenfranchised, where the system is not reaching out to them, is not assisting, is not supplying resources, to then stand up and be civically engaged, because we have earned the right to civically distrust. It's rational and it's logical. But then there is also what is also logical, and we ladies know well, when you're looking at your options and you don't love everything about any one man, you decide to stay single. And so people are deciding not to go to the polls because they're tired of voting for the lesser of an evil. Because they're tired of evil. The problem is that in so doing, and making this logical choice, it is actually historically irrational. It is actually historically disrespectful and perpetuates our disenfranchisement, because the system
Perpetuates our disenfranchisement,
Yes.
Brooklyn.
Yes, the system is counting on us to count ourselves out. And so you don't have to control people anymore if you can control how they think or their level of frustration, so they throw their hands in the air. And that's why we still have to hit the street with our feet and vote our voice.
So what do you tell people who just say, my vote doesn't count? Nothing changes. It doesn't matter whether a Democrat's in office or a Republican, my vote just doesn't count.
Well, I tell them that this is one of the great American mythologies, because there's a lot of American mythologies. Toni Morrison said it very well, didn't she, when she said they told us that we were savages and we were animals and we were dumb, we were only good for labor, but yet they gave us their children to raise. So they knew it was a myth. So this is one of the mythologies that our vote doesn't count. And here's why. 2019, let's look at Queens, right? The other royal borough. And in the county of Queens, 2019, in the primary race for district attorney, that race was decided by 60 vote margin. 6-0, okay? Now that's a barbecue. If you're lucky and your cousins didn't know. That's 60 people. And in 2013, in Bed-Stuy, heart of Brooklyn, one of my favorite places, my former neighborhood, we had a city council election, and you all know who I'm talking about. The primary was decided by 100 votes. That's not even a baby shower.
Right.
And so we are one baby shower.
21% or 23% showing up though.
Thank you. So we are one baby shower or barbecue away from the seat of power.
Wow.
And we're still not showing up. So these races, every vote counts. That's why they call them nail biters. That's why on the local level, because everything that happens outside of your doorstep and some of what happens inside is local politics. The garbage is picked up or not. The rats that are on the street.
I don't think people make a connection between garbage pickups and an elected official.
And
I don't think they
this-
do.
Yes.
I don't think they do. Right.
Representation
talk about
matters.
that a
Yes,
little bit.
representation matters. So your council person is one of 51 people in New York City that decides on a budget of over $1 billion. If I had $1 billion, would I hand it away and walk away from it? But that's what we do when we don't go to the polls. So the budget for education, the budget for senior centers, the budget for potholes. Are you tired of the potholes? Are you tired of your streets not being salted? That is your local elected official. And it's not just important that you know who they are, it's more important that they know who you are.
That's right. That's right. Your commentary is really reminding me that when we're talking about politics, we're talking about who determines what the resources are and who determines who gets access to the resources. So are you going to be having alternate side parking every other day of the week, or is it going to be something a little more accommodating to the community that's organized and prepared to fight that battle? Are you going to have a curriculum that's culturally responsive to the needs of your children, or are you going to be forced to learn a curriculum that does not center them where they don't see themselves? Are you going to have access to hospitals, to health care? Are you going to have access to the types of buses that are appropriate for your community, the kind that can raise and lower to accommodate a community of seniors who have walkers and wheelchairs, or are you just going to get thrown any old last minute transportation services? Do you have public transportation at all? All of these things are decided by the vote. And one of the things that I heard in what you said that really stuck with me was this idea that we're voting for who we like, because we're tired of evil. And one thing, popularity. But one thing I'd love to get your thoughts on this is, quite frankly, when you're voting, you're not looking for a spouse, you're not looking for a parent for your child, you're not looking for a close, dear friend. You're looking for someone who can make the decision and decide who gets the hospitals, where do the bus routes go, who gets access to the schools, who gets a library that's open or shut on a Sunday. That is decided by your elected officials, and you don't have to love them. You don't even have to like them. The question is, who's going to decide in a way that's more favorable to your community or least harmful to your community?
And least harmful is really important, because who is deciding on the routes that the garbage trucks take and the hours that they're taking, the commercial garbage? Who is deciding on that when we have communities with young children, with babies? We have communities where we have elderly, and who's deciding on where city agencies are putting those biospheres, right? So that you can get your grandmother out of the car safely and then into the home without having to go around or open the car door on the street side. So all of these things are decided on your block by your representative. And a lot of people tell me, Kathy, I'm not into politics.
Right.
And I say, well,
Do
that's
they
a
even know who their
shame.
representative is?
Precisely.
Have they ever been to their offices? I doubt
Thank
it.
you.
Those offices are empty most of the time. when
Most
you're
of the
going
time,
busy.
and that's a shame, and people pass them every day. But if you're not into politics, it's unfortunate, because politics is into you.
That's right.
It is
Right.
into
Right. That's
every
so true.
decision
That's right.
about the resources on your block.
Politics is into you.
One of the other things that's a challenge, you mentioned the low turnout. There's also a racial discrepancy there, because Black New Yorkers, for example, make up 23 maybe % of the, which would be likely more if more of us filled out the census, but we'll put that to the side for another conversation. But you have, the Black population at about a quarter, the Latin American population at just over a quarter, white population not much beyond that, and yet voter turnout, you will often see rates of 50 to 60% turnout in the white community and very low rates in other communities, which means even though white New Yorkers make up a pretty equitable share of this population, they're deciding things. They're picking the leadership. They're picking the folks who get to decide all the questions that politics answers. And I don't know that people realize that
They
in
don't,
a way that
right?
would,
Right,
it's
right.
interesting.
Exactly.
It's because voting is a right. It's not a privilege. Or what do you think about that? What I just said, voting being a right, privilege.
Ballot that we cast is tear-streaked and blood-stained.
Thank you. That's
Tear-streaked and blood-stained. People died for it, wept for it, crept through cesspools of regulations
and white
Jim
people
Crow.
died
Absolutely.
for it.
Jim Crow. So and I'm so glad that you said that, Toni. No group in America, no group has ever cast that ballot without bleeding for it. 1776, did we not fight our mother England? A bloody battle for years in order to cast that first vote that gave men the authority to vote if they had property and were 21 years or older, right? And then it wasn't until 1870 then Black men were given the right to vote, but immediately then they were stopped by the terrorist acts of Jim Crow and other things, right? All other state regulations. So 1870 happened, but it really didn't come to fruition. The manifestation never happened for us. Then it was 1920, women, the suffragettes, they suffered. White women, right? And thank you for saying, we were excluded from that.
Right.
We tried our best. We marched in the parade without their permission, but we were not given that right to vote. 1920. But many of them lost their homes. They lost their families. They were divorced. They were put in asylums because that was the form of incarceration for white women then, right? And they were beaten. So the suffragettes suffered for that vote. And then you got to bring it down to 1924, 200 years after we were established, that the Native Americans got the right to vote in this country. And I don't need to tell you how much blood they shed to do that.
Yeah.
So, now, I want to talk a little bit about mythologies, especially as it relates to incarcerated or those who are formerly incarcerated.
Yes, absolutely. So this is critical because in 2021, the governor at that time passed a law that said once you are released from prison, you are no longer incarcerated. Regardless of probation, you can vote. Now, if you were incarcerated for a felony and lost your right to vote for that time, you have to re-register, but you may register and vote.
Even with the felony, you're saying?
With the felony. So once you have done your time on a felony, the second you are released, get that voter registration form because you can register and you can vote. Your name is good. So often when we go into certain communities, as I affectionately call it the hood, they tell me, sis, my name ain't no good. No, that's not true. Because once you are no longer incarcerated, even with a felony, doesn't matter if it was a murder, doesn't matter what it was, you can re-register and vote. If you are incarcerated and waiting for trial, or if it's a misdemeanor, it's not a felony, or if you're at Rikers, we currently conduct voter registration at Rikers. We have an amazing person at the Civic Engagement Commission who works with the Department of Corrections and goes to Rikers on a monthly basis and registers people to vote. If you're on probation, you can vote.
Do they go out and campaign? Meaning, do the candidates go to Rikers? I mean, I'm just
Not
wondering.
to my knowledge.
Yeah, see, so.
Not to
But the
my
question
knowledge.
isn't so much in that case, are they registered, but are they actually going to act on the registration? We have a significant number of, a very high percentage of registered voters in this state, in this city. But if you're not actually exercising it, and I as the candidate, I know which communities are exercising their right to
and
vote.
that's where you're going to go.
Why
That's
would
where you're going.
Why would I spend my time talking to a community that's not going to come out when I can cater my message to a community that will? And when we're talking about that historical resonance, I think it's so important that you raise that. A lot of times when young people hear, "Oh, your ancestors, tear stained in blood," I don't care.
Yeah, that was ages ago,
And
right?
my thing is, listen, your ancestors weren't fighting for the right to vote because they wanted fireworks, apple pie, and a piece of Americana. They were voting because the sheriff is an elected position. And if the sheriff who is in power in your community is also the grand dragon of the Ku Klux Klan, then you have a problem. Because the tax assessor is an elected position. And if the tax assessor is the secretary of the Ku Klux Klan, and they're going to be determining the value of your property, whether or not it has any value, if they're going to undervalue it, overvalue it, and undertax you, then you have a problem. They were voting because the decision makers were blatantly anti-black and racist. And they weren't just trying for fireworks, they were doing it because those decisions have a real world impact. If your police commissioner is policing in a way that you don't like, how does the police commissioner get their job? If your education system, we've seen this before. If your education system is not teaching your children effectively, who picks the chancellor? Is the chancellor elected? If yes, then you know how to conduct yourself. If not, what elected position appoints the chancellor? And when you can break it down this way, then communities that have been traditionally disenfranchised and marginalized and don't see themselves reflected in the power of the vote, well, then you could have a different conversation. If we could get Rikers to vote, I guarantee you Rikers would not look the way Rikers look.
But all the information that you just gave, I am sure the common person's not thinking that way. How do we activate and mobilize and make that happen?
When we share information, knowledge is power. So we have to start sharing information about elections and about elected officials and about what's at stake the same way we share information about the next barbecue or sale.
Right.
And this is the reality. And so in the civil rights movement, we had teach-ins. Each one reach one, so each one can teach one. We recreated that model for this with the census that Lurie and I worked on. We created teach-ins. Currently, Democracy NYC is conducting teach-ins all over the city, and we're talking about what's at stake, and we're having real talk about real people. You want to talk about the rights to vote of the previously incarcerated? Right now, sitting in the city council, we have one of the exonerated 5 who was falsely imprisoned, falsely, and is now sitting in power because Harlem stood up and put him there and voted. They came out, they voted with their feet, and they said, put this man in office because he gets it. And if we can do that, we can turn the tides. Again, some people are winning by 60 votes, by 100 votes. We had someone in East New York, Rafi, he won by 300, by 600 votes. I mean, this is not a large margin here.
But this is a game in a lot of respects. By that I mean, in order to run for office, typically you have to have some sort of political club or something of that nature?
No, absolutely not.
So talk, that's my myth. That's my myth.
Yes,
Okay, right, that's my myth.
I ran for city council in 2013.
Okay.
I came in second to an incumbent who got her 3rd term. I wasn't part of a club. I was, you know what I was? I was mad. I had
That's what it takes,
a child
Kathleen.
in Head Start, and I had a child in kindergarten, and the system wasn't working for them. And I couldn't get into the public school 5 blocks away from my house that I wanted them to go to, and I didn't know how to game the system like other people.
Right,
so I had
gaming
to
it,
join
yes.
a lottery. I got into a charter school, and I was happy with it. But then the Head Start wasn't getting its funding again. Every year they're saying it's going to close. So I got mad. So I said, you know what, I can do bad all by myself. And I ran for office, and we have an excellent matching funds program. For every $10 that anyone who gives you $10 from the city of New York, the city's gonna match it 8 times more. Dollar for dollar. So that's the only way I could have afforded to do that, because it costs more to run for office than to buy a house in this town, right? But anybody can do it. And you don't need a college degree. You can be a high school student, graduate, and you can get your high school diploma or GED, and you can run for office. You can be previously incarcerated and run for office. You don't have to be connected to anyone but the voters.
And I think that that is a substantial problem, because folks don't think highly of those that they elect.
And some of that, again, is rational.
Some of them do not. You know,
how did we begin? Lurie said we've seen some things.
Yes.
And then there's some things that we simply haven't seen that we need. Here is the challenge. It is remembering that in a democracy, which is still what this is, whether or not we participate, whether or not we activate, it's going on without you. Whether or not you believe in gravity, if you jump up, you're gonna come back down. And so democracy works the same way. We have to make the decision that we're gonna be in it, whether or not we like the people, love the people. We have to take it as an act of self-care and self-preservation.
Self-care, yes, self-care and self-preservation.
That's why we must vote. Otherwise, everything that we know is going to change and disappear. We're going to lose it little by little by little, and then wake up and wonder, wait a minute, what happened? But we had rights. No, because you did wrong with your rights and you didn't exercise them.
And then we're in a situation where it's not like the rights you leave at the table when you're not voting are just left on the table. Someone else gets to come behind you and scoop up all the benefits that you did not activate. And as I'm thinking about what's happening across the country nationally, as we've talked before about this rise in white nationalism, this rise in Nazism
and voter
fascism,
suppression, right?
And voter suppression.
Absolutely.
The Nazis are voting. Folks, the racists, the people who do not believe in a multiracial democracy, the people who do not want to see an integrated America, they vote, they come out, and they are committed to that ballot regardless of whether or not they actually like the candidates. They're clear-eyed, and I want us to be too. And in fact, speaking of the fact that racists are voting and in mass, let's talk about states' rights, this issue, this phrase that we often hear. Usually when we're talking about the Civil War, and you hear that it's about, the war was about states' rights. I always like to say the states' right to do what? Oh, right, to own enslaved Africans. That's right. But let's talk about the battle over states' rights versus federalism that we're seeing when it comes to issues like reproductive justice, which is happening right now. We have now the New York State, John R. Lewis New York State Voting Rights Act, because we don't have it at the federal level. Give us a sense as to how the states' rights versus federalism impacts what's happening right here in Bed-Stuy.
Yes.
Brooklyn.
So this is, states' rights, it's a pivotal issue. Looking at 1870 on a national level, black men had the right to vote. However, It didn't happen, couldn't happen, because on so many states we had different regulations and different laws that gave so many reasons why African Americans could not vote, and then did things like poll taxes, did things like needing to be nominated to vote, things like publishing your name in the newspaper if you voted so that you would be beaten or killed or threatened if you voted. And it wasn't until 1965 that we actually won that right to vote. And when you look at the Emancipation Proclamation, that was on a federal level, right?
Right.
But the reason we celebrate Juneteenth is because several years after that, we still had people enslaved in Texas because they shipped slaves. They literally, the first busing system, they took them over to Texas, where they knew Texas was going to fight until the bitter end, and kept them enslaved, hoping that
Still the
everything would be
culture.
overturned and they would come back, right? And this is something we're not, here's another thing. We're not learning this in school because right now, so many states are making decisions on what part of Black history to teach.
Right.
And we're not talking about the elementary and kindergarten level. We're talking about on the collegiate level. They have in Florida right now, they're debating what truth to teach and how to teach the truth in such a way that is distorted enough to placate the people of privilege.
Cognitive
This is
dissonance.
nonsense. I mean, this is a nonsense. And forgive me, I'm being purposely plain spoken.
No, I'm
because
loving this.
I need people that are sitting on the corner, that are at the bodegas, that are in the laundromat to hear this and understand plainly. We're talking about us, right? This is just about us. And so state
just
rights,
us.
it is
Yes.
And so when we're talking about states' rights, the state can decide that while the federal government says that you can have this, I'm only going to give you a little piece of this, or I'm going to make it so hard for you to get this. I'm going to put taxes on it, fines on it, fees on it. I'm going to put it in rural areas where you can't
Talk
get
about
to.
suppression.
I can actually make it so hard for you to get it that you give up. Sounds familiar?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sounds like how we handle voting these days, right? We're so fed up. We're so tired of it that we're not doing it anymore. And we always talk about voter registration. Voter registration is important. We've made it so easy now. You can do it online if you have a New York State ID. Now, in
Too
September,
bad you can't. Can you vote online? I mean, that would be
you
real
can't
easy.
vote online,
No,
but
that would
guess
be good
what?
one day, hopefully.
You can vote by mail. Now,
True,
there's
true,
the absentee
true.
ballot. If you're
Right.
going to be absent, you need a reason for an absentee ballot. But in September 2023, our Governor Kathy Hochul signed into law. It went into effect January 1st. Anybody who is a resident of New York State who wants to vote by mail needs simply fill in a form and request it.
Wow.
And you have
Yes.
until you can apply for that form and fill in that form up until the day before the election. I mean,
One of the
come on, so
reasons-
easy.
But and here's the thing. When we're saying you need to go vote, no one's saying to climb Mount Kilimanjaro.
Right.
No one's saying you have to
Right.
go save
Right.
thousands
Right.
of people out the ocean.
Right.
It is easy. And we tie these moral debates about I just don't like and I don't feel like the candidate speaks to me. Have that conversation in your prayer closet.
Right.
Have that conversation. Do your moral waffling and figuring out your place in the world between
Yes.
you and to whomever you pray to. When it comes to the vote, I need us to be cold, calculating, and ruthlessly clear about what is on the line. And when we're talking
Ruthlessly
about
clear.
states' rights in this
Right.
day and age, yes, there are states' rights over this issue of enslavement. Let's talk about states' rights with reproductive justice. We're all glad to live in a state like
New York.
Yes.
But
Right.
let me tell you something.
Don't go to
If
Texas.
if the Republicans are able to secure the presidency, to secure the Senate, to maintain their hold in the House, they're talking about a nationwide abortion ban. So they believe in states' rights when it's going to benefit them, but they don't believe in states' rights when it comes to any other state enacting an agenda they are not in alignment with. And again, you're not asking you to climb the mountain and save babies out of the volcano. It's fill out the form. Who do you think should decide all the things that impact your life? And I think that's a conversation that all of us should be eager to have.
Absolutely. I want to talk about candidates, though, right? And accountability. And report cards, because I do remember in my office, we would have a bunch of pictures of elected officials that had been convicted of crimes. We used to have it up there in the office. So how do
Rightfully
we...
convicted.
Rightfully. Yeah.
Very
Right, Brooklyn.
important.
But how, when it comes to candidates, getting to know them, what should people be looking for? a lot of folks don't know positions. They don't even know what a position is. They don't know what, so what, how do you get people to start to connect that way?
And this is one of the things that we discuss in our teach-ins. What's on the ballot? Who's on the ballot? And what is that person's responsibility? Because when the judges come on the ballot, like they did in the general election, November 23, most people didn't know what all these different judges were and what they did.
You just check.
Right? Yep. And this is one of the challenges, right? Because you have judges that were making decisions on foster care, on your wealth, what happens when you pass away, on guardianship. You had all of these different roles. So in the teach-ins, we go through what exactly is this role. One of the best websites that the city has is the Campaign Finance Board. We also have Democracy NYC, and we have the Board of Elections. So you have a trifecta of people that are communicating about this. And so you can go to vote.nyc, you can go to NYC Votes, or you can go to nyc.gov/democracynyc, and we will tell you what's on the ballot. We will tell you who's on the ballot, and we'll tell you what are these roles and responsibilities. So once you see, for example, City Council, they're going to decide on over $1 billion of your tax money. The money that you don't even get to see in your check because it's taken off the top, okay? That's your tithe to the city. That happens right there. And so they're going to decide that. And that means potholes. That means garbage. That means street lights. That means when I've got a problem, who am I calling? It is that person. And so it is critical that you decide what's the most important part of this New York City budget. What matters to me on my block? Is it the bus schedule? Is it that my mother is elderly and I'm going to have to make some decisions about her care? Is it that I go to the public hospital that's in my neighborhood, but the care there is inadequate? I'm not covered enough. These are the things that we have to think about.
The teach-in will tell you that? The teach-ins tell you that? How frequent are they and where are they?
So you can request a teach-in, and I can provide the email address. It's K-A-T, Daniel @civicengagement.nyc.gov, and we teach other leaders to turnkey and then do teach-ins. Again, each one reach one, so each one can teach one, because it is by these community conversations that we increase our power.
Is the budget process in these teach-ins? Meaning, because that is something to behold and understand.
Absolutely. Okay. Now, we don't just talk about the money. We talk about how they spend the money and how they decide how they spend the money. And then we look at where the money goes. Okay, because it's all about the dollar. And that is important. So again, like Lurie said, we don't have to like everything about the candidate. Just figure out what's the most important thing to you. And we don't have to do much thinking because you already know. What's the biggest challenge that you have? And we do need to go back to report cards and scorecards.
Yes.
Because once they're in office, they don't have to stay there. We have the power to remove them. But we have to pay attention on how they voted, how they impacted your day-to-day life. Did you make it easier for me, or did you make it harder?
Think about it like this. I heard this example recently, and I think this is a great way to put it. The campaign is their interview process. The vote is our hiring decision because they work for us. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't recall the last time I ever had a job where I didn't have an evaluation.
Performance appraisal.
Performance evaluation. And if I did not perform, I was not going to be able to stay in that institution. This is how we have to begin thinking about the vote. Now, I'm sure all the people who hired me weren't in love with me. I'm sure they all weren't, enthralled with the idea of us just working together. They had a job that needed to get done, and I was the most competent person to do it. They hired me. That is the election. And when you hire someone, your job as the manager, we the people, is to make sure that they are performing the way that you need.
This was exciting. I am so happy that you are the Chief Democracy Officer. I mean, that is amazing. And we'll see you next time on It's Just Us.